Get up. Someone like you does not sit in this row. Would you recognize the man who could ground an entire airline if he were sitting 3 feet away from you, being handed a lukewarm coffee like an afterthought? Elijah Marsh sat near the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Continental Crest Sterling Lounge at Denver International Airport, watching rain streak sideways across the tarmac at 6:52 in the morning. His hands were folded around a paper cup that had gone cold 18 minutes ago. Outside, silver jets taxied under a bruised gray sky, their wingtip lights blinking like something trying to signal for help. Inside, everything smelled of dark roast espresso, leather polish, and the particular quiet of people who had never had to ask if they belonged somewhere. Deborah Hayes moved through the lounge with a silver carafe in one hand and a smile that changed shape depending on who was standing in front of her. For the retired couple in matching cashmere near the fireplace, it opened wide and warm. More coffee, Mr. and Mrs. Calloway? You remembered, the woman said, delighted, as though memory itself were a form of love. Always, Deborah said, and poured before the cup was even empty. 2 tables over, a heavy-set man in a navy blazer lifted 2 fingers without looking up from his phone, and Deborah turned so fast the carafe trembled in her hand. She laughed at something he hadn't even finished saying. Then she passed Elijah's table. Her eyes touched him for exactly half a second. The charcoal suit, the dark brown hands folded on the armrest, the scuffed leather briefcase that had belonged to his father, and then her gaze slid past him like water, finding the path of least resistance. 41 minutes. That was how long Elijah had been sitting in that lounge. Not one refill, not one question, not one word. He noticed. He noticed everything. That habit, cataloging small failures before they became large ones, was exactly why, 19 years earlier, he had built Solera Aviation systems out of a card table in a 1-bedroom apartment in Aurora, Colorado, and turned it into the invisible nervous system running underneath nearly 1/3 of major U.S. carriers. His software did not fly planes. It told planes when they were legally, safely, and financially cleared to move. Fuel confirmations, crew duty windows, baggage chain custody, gate to taxiway release. Every silent permission that let an airline pretend that flight was simple. To Deborah Hayes, he was a black man sitting too still in a room she had quietly decided belonged to somebody else. To the aviation industry, Elijah Marsh was the reason Continental Crest Airways could move a single aircraft at all. His mother, Ruth Marsh, used to say it while ironing shirts at 11 at night in their apartment on the east side of Detroit. Baby, don't you dare spend your whole life proving you're human to people who've already made up their minds not to see it. He had tried to live by that. Most days he succeeded. But the body remembers what dignity costs. It remembers the restaurant host who asked if he was waiting for someone before he'd given his name. It remembers the hotel clerk in Scottsdale who looked past him to ask his white intern for the reservation. It remembers his own company's name in 6-inch letters on a hospital donor wall in Cherry Creek, while a security guard at the same gala asked him, twice, for identification, just to stand near the dessert table. He had learned not to flinch. He had not yet learned to call it nothing. The boarding announcement floated through the lounge speakers, calm and mechanical. Continental Crest Flight 214, non-stop service to London Heathrow. First-class passengers, please proceed to gate C41. The room gathered itself. Coats, phones, the soft murmur of people who had never once wondered if their seat would still be theirs when they arrived. Deborah walked the Calloways to the door, with the warmth of someone seeing off family. Then she turned back and, for the first time, looked directly at Elijah. Not with recognition, with relief. Finally, he's leaving. A younger attendant near the service counter, a girl of maybe 23 with tired eyes, and her name tag reading J. Jeffries watched him gather his briefcase. "Sir," she said quietly, before Deborah could stop her. Have a safe flight. Elijah paused just long enough to meet her eyes. Thank you, he said. 2 words. But something in his voice made the younger woman look down, as if she had just watched something happen that she should have stopped 40 minutes ago. He walked out of the lounge without looking back. Behind him, the espresso machine hissed, cups clinked, and somebody laughed too loudly at nothing. Life kept moving the way it always does around a small, quiet cruelty, because nobody had screamed, and polite people can always deny what nobody screamed about. At gate C41, the lighting was harsher, the kind that makes everyone look a little more exposed. Near the counter stood Patricia Doyle, the gate supervisor, silver blonde hair pinned back tight enough to pull at the corners of her eyes. She beamed at the couple ahead of Elijah.
Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield, London for business again?
Unfortunately, the husband said, and Patricia laughed like he'd handed her a gift. Right this way. Then, Elijah stepped up. The smile did not fade. Boarding pass, sir. Her voice had gone clean and official, but underneath it, Elijah heard the older question, the one that never needed saying out loud. How did you get here? He held out his phone. Seat 2A. The scanner beeped green. Patricia's eyes moved from the screen to his face and back down again, and her fingers began tapping. Not the rhythm of someone solving a problem, but the rhythm of someone constructing one. There appears to be an issue with your assignment, she said. Seat 2A, first class. Confirmed 6 weeks ago, Elijah said, his voice level. Patricia's mouth tightened. There was an equipment adjustment early this morning. He heard the lie before it finished leaving her mouth. A wide-body aircraft does not silently reconfigure. On a transatlantic route, without crew notifications, catering revisions, weight and balance signatures, and a dozen digital fingerprints that Solera's own systems would have flagged before the gate printer even warmed up. None of that had come through. What's the new assignment? He asked. Premium economy, Patricia said. Seat 31B. A middle seat, 3 rows from the lavatory. It's a very comfortable seat, sir. The word sir had no respect left inside it. It was a label stapled to the end of a sentence, so the sentence could pass inspection. I paid for first class. Why was it released if the cabin isn't full? I'm only telling you what the system shows. No, Elijah said quietly enough that it landed harder than shouting would have. You're telling me what you'd like me to accept. That was when Craig Sullivan, the senior flight attendant, stepped through the jet bridge door. Mid-40s, sandy hair combed back, silver wings catching the overhead light, the easy smirk of a man who had spent his whole career being believed before he even finished a sentence. Problem, Patricia. This passenger is refusing his reassignment. Elijah watched the sentence get rearranged in real time, watched the truth get repainted in public. Craig's eyes swept him once. Suit, briefcase, brown skin, calm face. And the conclusion arrived before the thinking did. Sir, we have a schedule to keep. Take the seat. Customer relations can discuss compensation later. This isn't about compensation. Craig's smile didn't move. It usually is. A few phones had begun to rise. Not high, just enough. May I see the release code? Elijah asked. That's internal, Craig said. A confirmed paid first-class seat doesn't reassign without a code. Equipment change, weight balance, federal marshal requirement, duplicate booking. There's always a code. Patricia's eyes flicked to her monitor and back, a small flash of worry, crossing her face fast as a struck match. Craig caught it, and that should have been the moment he slowed down. Instead, his voice dropped lower. You can accept the accommodation, sir, or we can deny boarding for failure to comply with crew instruction. There it was, the threat, polished clean. Somewhere behind Elijah, a man muttered, "Just take the seat." An older woman near the priority line, silver curls under a wool cap, cane against her leg, said quietly to no one, "But why should he have to?" Her husband touched her arm in warning. She didn't look away from Elijah. He thought of his mother's hand on his shoulder, 40 years gone and still steady. Don't let them make you small. He could say his name right now. He could make Patricia's monitor light up with messages from people who outranked everyone in that terminal. But this had stopped being only about him the moment it became easy to hide. "Fine," he said. "I'll take 31B. Patricia exhaled before she could stop herself. Craig stepped aside with the satisfaction of a man who believed he'd won. "Thank you for your cooperation." Elijah looked at him. "Don't mistake silence for agreement." He walked down the jet bridge alone, past a first-class cabin already glowing gold with champagne and folded blankets, past a stranger already settling into seat 2A, mid-50s, white, an expensive watch catching the cabin light, not once glancing up as Elijah passed. Patricia had said the cabin was full. Here was the lie, made flesh. He kept walking, past the curtain, past the warmth, into premium economy, where the air was thinner and the seats sat closer together, and 31B waited for him in the middle, between a woman already wearing a neck pillow and a man who had claimed both armrests like they'd come with his birth certificate. He lowered himself into the seat. His knees touched the seat back in front of him. He fastened the buckle, and the click sounded final, like a small lock closing. From the front of the cabin came the clink of glass on glass, a warm towel being offered, a curtain falling back into place. He took out his phone. He did not call customer service. He called Malik Turner. Malik answered on the second ring, his voice sharpening the instant he heard who it was, because Elijah, did not call during boarding, unless something had gone very wrong. Initiate blackout protocol on the Continental Crest account. Silence. Heavy silence. "James, that's a full ground operations integrity hold. It's never been triggered. It's being triggered now. Are we compromised?" Elijah watched a shadow move behind the first-class curtain. Someone laughed. "Not compromised," he said. "Exposed. Authorization. Marsh. Delta. 9. Full contractual lock. Ground operations only. No aircraft currently airborne. No safety system touched. No passenger safety function affected." A pause. The low click of keys, 3 time zones away. In a secure operations room outside Aurora, where 3 monitors would already be lighting Malik's face. "Confirmed," Malik said at last. "Blackout staging. Scope limited to Continental Crest Airways. Fuel approval, dispatch clearance, baggage chain custody, crew validation, gate release. All frozen at the right level. Read access remains open. Execute integrity hold. James, execute." "Executing," Malik said, and the word came out flat and final. The cabin door sealed with a heavy mechanical thud. The engines began their low rising whine. The woman beside Elijah tightened her neck pillow and smiled at him with the mild friendliness of someone who had no idea because she was sitting next to a man who had just changed the night. "Long flight," she said. Elijah slid his phone into airplane mode. Longer for some than others. 600 miles away, in Continental Crest's Global Operations Center outside Fort Worth, Nina Alvarez noticed the first anomaly at 7:41 that morning, as a thin yellow line crawling across a wall-sized screen. She was 29, sharp-eyed, 4 years into crew validation. Still young enough to believe good systems protected good people. Flight 340 out of Miami had everything it needed: legal crew, fueled aircraft, boarded passengers. She clicked validate. Denied. She ran it again. Denied. Anyone else getting validation errors? A systems coordinator 2 rows over raised his hand without looking up. Fuel approvals frozen in Seattle. Another voice, farther off, baggage chain locked in Boston. Then another, dispatch clearance not writing in Newark. The yellow line spread across the wall map. Miami, Seattle, Boston, Newark, then Chicago, then Atlanta, then Los Angeles, then Heathrow. Yellow became orange. Orange became red. Frank Delgado, her supervisor, a former Navy logistics officer built like a man who trusted procedure because procedure had once kept him alive, crossed the floor with coffee in hand. "What are we looking at?" Multiple right access failures, Nina said. Not regional. System-wide. Read access is fine. Nothing will commit. That sentence killed whatever calm remained in the room, because an airline does not survive on visibility. It survives on permission. Permission to fuel, to load, to move a plane 6 feet from a gate to a taxiway. Without permission, an airline is not an airline. It is a museum full of very expensive metal. A banner crawled across the top of the operations map. Integrity, Review Active. Solera, Aviation Systems. Frank's face went pale under the fluorescent lights. He had seen those words exactly once before, buried in a contract appendix that most executives signed without reading, the way people sign disaster clauses believing disasters are written for other companies. Who authorized this? Nina's fingers moved fast across her keyboard. Logs opened, permission trees unfolded. There, she said, voice dropping. Solera Aviation Systems, blackout protocol, account authority verified. The count began climbing. 11 aircraft held, 26, 52, 89. Each number wasn't just a plane. It was a cabin of people watching duty clocks. A surgeon missing a conference. A grandmother missing a granddaughter's wedding. Fuel trucks parked, uselessly under wings from Denver to Dublin. By the time Walter Kessler, Continental Crest's chief operating officer, walked into that operations center in an unbuttoned jacket and a loosened tie, 141 aircraft sat frozen across the network. He didn't need anyone to explain the scale. The silence told him. What failed? He asked. Nothing failed, Frank said. That's the problem. He handed over a tablet. Walter read it once, his expression tightening, then draining entirely. Blackout protocol, he said. Initiated by Solera. Why would they lock us out? No one answered. Then Nina, still seated at her console, opened a linked incident flag that had surfaced beside the account authority log. Small, almost hidden. A passenger service report from Denver, Gate C41, Flight 214, seat reassignment. First Class 2A to Premium Economy 31B. Her hands went cold. Sir, there's an incident report tied to the account. Passenger name, Elijah Marsh. Nobody moved. Every operations officer in that room knew Solera. Every executive at Continental Crest knew the name Elijah Marsh, because his company was the digital spine underneath their entire operation, and replacing it would take years, and fighting it would take a small army of lawyers, and restoring access would require the one thing corporations hated needing most: an apology to the man they had just humiliated. Get Walter. Get the CEO on the phone, someone said now. At 31,000 feet over the Atlantic, Elijah Marsh sat upright with his hands folded in his lap while a man slept against his own shoulder space in the window seat, and a woman across the aisle scrolled through a movie list. Unaware she was sitting 3 rows from the center of a global story that hadn't broken yet. He had already done what needed doing. There was no thrill in it. Only a cold ache under his ribs, because he knew what the headlines would count and what they wouldn't. They would count delayed flights, falling stock, stranded passengers, furious posts. They would not count Deborah Hayes looking straight through him for 41 minutes. They would not count Patricia Doyle inventing a seat conflict with a straight face. They would not count the particular sound of a seatbelt buckle at 31B, closing like a small lock. A young flight attendant stopped at his row. Red hair, freckles across the bridge of her nose, name tag reading C. Ramsey, carrying a tray of water cups with both hands. Sir, would you like some water? She handed it to him with care, not tossed across, and something in her face flickered. Not recognition yet, something closer to shame, the quiet kind people feel when they sense they've walked into the aftermath of something wrong. Long flight, she said. Longer for some than others, Elijah said again, and this time Chloe Ramsey held his gaze 1 second too long before moving on. Then the captain's voice came over the speaker, warm and entirely unaware. Ladies and gentlemen, we're cruising comfortably across the Atlantic. We expect an on-time arrival into London Heathrow. Elijah almost smiled. On-time arrival. Because far below, in glass towers and fluorescent-lit operations centers, powerful men were learning that arrival was not the same thing as control. A few rows ahead, a businessman kept refreshing his phone, chasing the last scraps of onboard Wi-Fi, until his brow tightened. "Huh," he muttered. "Something wrong?" the woman beside him asked. "Continental Crest's having some kind of meltdown. Flights grounded everywhere. Dallas, Seattle, Boston, started at Denver." The half-loaded headline crawled across his screen. Continental Crest facing worldwide operational freeze after reported discrimination at Denver Gate. The words reached Elijah like a bell struck underwater, quiet and impossible to ignore.
Can you believe that?
The woman beside him said to no one in particular. Imagine being stuck on the ground right now. Elijah looked past her, toward the curtain, separating him from first class. Some people were stuck long before the planes were, he said. She frowned, unsure whether he meant it as poetry or as an accusation. In first class, Craig Sullivan heard the first wave of it from the forward galley. Arms folded, pretending to review service notes on a tablet while quietly editing the gate incident into something he could survive. Difficult passenger. Seat conflict, handled professionally. That was how men like Craig protected themselves. They did not remember what happened, only what they could defend. A passenger in seat 1C raised his phone. "Are you aware Continental Crest flights are being held worldwide?" Craig smiled, practiced. "Operational delays happen, sir. Our flight's operating normally." The man turned his screen around. Craig read the headline once, then again, his throat tightening around the words JFK. No, Denver Gate, discrimination. Didn't name him yet. But the word reported sat there like a loaded weapon waiting on a table. He stepped into the galley and pulled the curtain half shut. His crew tablet was already filling with internal messages. Operations advisory. Ground access disruption. Capireview active preserved all recordsat to flight 214. Preserve all records. The phrase hit him in the stomach. Elijah Marsh. The name hadn't mattered at the gate. Now it felt like the first hairline crack across a windshield. Chloe Ramsey walked slowly down the aisle with a trash bag in one hand, feeling the temperature of the cabin change around her. People reading, whispering, comparing screens, looking around as though the center of the story might be sitting among them. She knew more than they did. The manifest had quietly updated mid-flight, a corporate flag appearing beside one passenger record that had made her stop breathing for a moment. Elijah Marsh, Chief Executive Officer, Solera Aviation Systems. Original seat 2A, crank seat 31B. She stopped beside his row. "Mr. Marsh." The woman beside him froze. "The captain would like to speak with you after landing." The words moved through the cabin in layers. A held breath, a turned head, a name traveling row by row without anyone speaking it aloud. Marsh. The man in 31B. The woman beside him looked at him properly for the first time. The suit, the watch, the stillness, the careful way Chloe had addressed him. "Were you supposed to be in first class?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Elijah said. The word was small. The effect was not. Her face flushed as the pieces joined behind her eyes. And what surfaced there wasn't gossip anymore. It was shame. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" "For assuming this was just some airline problem. For not seeing you were part of it." Elijah looked ahead. That's how it survives. At the front of the plane, Craig had heard every word through the thinning curtain. The man he'd dismissed at the gate wasn't a complainer chasing a payout. He was the consequence, and he had given Craig every chance to stop. "May I see the release code? This isn't about compensation. Don't mistake silence for agreement." Craig had heard all three as arrogance. Now they sounded like mercy he'd refused. Captain Marcus Whitfield. No relation to the couple at the gate. A coincidence that would strike no one who mattered. sat in the cockpit with the Atlantic stretching black beneath the aircraft when the message arrived from operations. Upon arrival, Heathrow. Request direct contact with passenger Elijah Marsh. Corporate leadership will meet. Aircraft preserve crew records. He read it twice, then looked at his first officer. This is bigger than a seat dispute. Flight 214 began its descent under a gray London morning. Phones came alive as the cabin dropped lower. News alerts flooding in from Boston, from Seattle, from a pilot in Dallas telling his cabin he had no release authority, from a grandmother crying because she'd miss her sister's surgery. Elijah watched the ripple of consequence move around him and did not look away from the pain his decision had caused. That mattered. Power without conscience was just another shape of cruelty, and he felt that truth tighten behind his eyes even as he held the line. But he also knew systems only change when comfort becomes more expensive than honesty. The wheels touched Heathrow with a hard kiss of rubber on wet runway. No one clapped. In the forward galley, Craig Sullivan stood with his hands clasped so tightly the knuckles had gone pale. The jet bridge door opened into a silence that did not belong to an ordinary arrival. It had weight. It pressed against the cabin walls and made people lower their voices without knowing why. Elijah stood from seat 31B, briefcase in one hand, jacket buttoned with the other, and moved without hurry, which made it worse for everyone watching, because a rushed man could be dismissed as emotional, and a loud man could be called difficult, and Elijah was neither. He was calm enough to frighten people. The woman beside him leaned back to let him pass. "Mr. Marsh, I really am sorry." "For what?" he asked again, softer this time. "For thinking it had nothing to do with me." He held her gaze a moment. Most unfair things survive because decent people decide they're only watching. She nodded slowly, as though accepting a lesson she wished she'd learned an hour earlier. Passengers watched him move through the cabin, phones rising now, some for proof, some, quietly, for protection. When he reached Chloe Ramsey near the rear galley, she had made herself stand there instead of hiding. "Mr. Marsh, I'm sorry for what happened on this flight. Did you cause it?" "No, sir." "Did you ignore it?" Her mouth opened, then closed. "I didn't know all of it. That isn't what I asked. I saw enough to know something was wrong." Elijah nodded once. "Then remember this feeling." "I will," she said, and it wasn't performance. It was a promise. In first class, Craig Sullivan stood near the galley, with his uniform still perfectly pressed, which only made him look smaller, because a pressed shirt cannot hide panic. "Mr. Marsh," he said, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Elijah stopped. The cabin tightened around them. Even the captain, standing near the cockpit door with his hat under one arm, did not interrupt. "A misunderstanding requires two people to be confused," Elijah said. "I was acting on information from the gate." "No. You were acting on a story you already believed." Craig flinched, small but visible. "You looked at me and decided I was trying to get something I hadn't earned." "Sir, that's not fair." Elijah tilted his head. Fair would have been checking the release code. Fair would have been asking why a confirmed seat disappeared. Fair would have been treating my question as a question, not a threat. Craig's eyes flicked toward the rising phones. "You're worried about being recorded now," Elijah said. "You should have been worried about being wrong then." Captain Whitfield stepped forward. "Mr. Marsh, corporate leadership is waiting in the jet bridge. Did you know before landing?" "Only after descent began. I knew there'd been a seat reassignment. I didn't know the circumstances. I should have asked more," the captain said, and the admission surprised the whole cabin, Craig most of all. "That's the first honest thing I've heard from this airline today," Elijah said. Through the open door, men in dark suits waited under harsh jet bridge lighting. A woman held a legal folder against her chest like a shield. Consequences, Elijah thought. Wear expensive shoes. Walter Kessler moved forward first, older in person than in any interview photo, the crisis carved into the hours behind his eyes. "Mr. Marsh, on behalf of Continental Crest, I want to offer our deepest apology." Elijah kept walking. "We understand you were improperly reassigned." He stopped so suddenly, Walter nearly stumbled into him. Improperly reassigned. The phrase seemed to rot in the air between them. A printer is improperly assigned. A baggage cart is improperly routed. A man is not improperly reassigned when your employees look at his skin and decide his ticket is negotiable. Walter went still. "You were subjected to racial bias and abuse of authority by members of our staff," he said slowly, and it clearly cost him something to say it. "Better," Elijah said. "Not enough." They walked him to a glass-walled executive room, deep in Heathrow's private services wing, rain crawling sideways down the windows, cameras already gathering behind a barrier outside. Robert, no, this was Walter's superior, CEO Gerald Ashworth, appeared on a conference screen from a private office in New York, his composure visibly cracking at the edges. "James." "Elijah, I want to begin by saying how personally sorry I am." Elijah didn't answer. "What happened does not reflect who we are as a company. It reflects exactly who you are when no one important is watching." An attorney across the table, tired-eyed, wedding ring, turning nervously between his fingers, leaned forward. "Mr. Marsh, with respect, this blackout is creating enormous operational harm. Families, elderly travelers, children, people who had nothing to do with this." "I agree," Elijah said, and the simple answer seemed to disarm the man entirely. "Innocent passengers shouldn't suffer because your company built a culture where dignity depends on appearance. That's why this needs to move quickly." Elijah opened his briefcase and set a single folder on the table. The sound was soft. Everyone in the room heard it anyway. "3 conditions," he said. "First, Deborah Hayes, Patricia Doyle, and Craig Sullivan are terminated today. Not transferred, not quietly retrained. Terminated for discriminatory conduct, abuse of authority, and falsifying the nature of a passenger complaint. Second, Gerald Ashworth issues a public statement within the hour. Not language about customer experience. You will name what happened. Racial bias, abuse of authority, wrongful downgrade. You will say my name, and you will say what your employees did. Third, Continental Crest funds a $60 million, 12-year independent passenger dignity and anti-bias program. Outside oversight, annual public reporting, mandatory de-escalation certification for every gate agent, lounge attendant, flight attendant, supervisor, and captain in this airline. A protected reporting channel for junior staff. So the next Chloe Ramsey doesn't have to choose between her job and her conscience. Until those conditions are accepted in writing, he said, closing the folder. Blackout protocol remains active on ground operations. No aircraft in the air will be touched. No safety system will ever be compromised. But your airline will not move another plane under my platform while pretending this was a misunderstanding. Gerald Ashworth's face on the screen had gone the particular color of a man realizing he cannot outrun what's coming. "You're asking me to humiliate my own company." "No," Elijah said. "Your company did that at gate C41. I'm asking you to tell the truth about it." The quiet attorney spoke first. "Gerald, we should accept." Walter Horse. "He's right. I've watched 141 aircraft sit dead on the ground because one man asked to be treated like his ticket mattered. We should accept." Ashworth closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them, he looked old in a way exhaustion alone couldn't explain. "Get the documents to legal." At Denver, in a back office near the crew lounge, Patricia Doyle sat with her badge already removed from its lanyard, insisting to an investigator that the system had simply shown a conflict. "You manually released the seat," the investigator said. "There was pressure at the gate." "From whom?" She had no answer, because the answer finally had a name. In a crew room at Heathrow, Craig Sullivan sat alone, under humming fluorescent light, while his own recorded voice played back to him from the jet bridge. This isn't about compensation. Usually is. There was no policy to hide inside that sentence anymore. Back in Denver, Deborah Hayes stood with her arms crossed while a manager showed her the statement on a phone. "I never said anything to him," she said. "That's part of the problem," the manager answered. Gerald Ashworth went live 48 minutes later, alone under the Continental Crest logo. No friendly backdrop, just a man, a glass of water, and a statement that had been rewritten until every hiding place inside it was gone. This morning at Denver International Airport, employees of Continental Crest Airways wrongfully downgraded Mr. Elijah Marsh from his paid, confirmed first-class seat after treating him through the lens of racial bias. They abused their authority. They failed to verify the facts. They failed him as a passenger, and they failed the values we have claimed to represent. We are not calling this a misunderstanding. It was racial bias. It was wrongful treatment. It was unacceptable. The employees directly involved have been terminated, effective immediately. In the operations center outside Fort Worth, Nina Alvarez watched the amber warning on her screen begin, at last, to soften. "Aaron," Malik's voice came through her supervisor's phone, steady but exhausted, coordinating a staged restoration. Gate movement first, dispatched sync second, fuel approval third, baggage chain last, to prevent mismatches. Red turned amber. Amber turned green, in careful waves, like a body being pulled slowly from deep water and taught, one breath at a time, how to work again. 2 weeks later, in a glass conference building near Denver International, used for aviation hearings and union negotiations, Elijah Marsh sat alone on one side of a long table. No entourage, no speechwriter. Across from him sat Gerald Ashworth, Walter Kessler, 2 board members, outside counsel, and rows of employees behind them, some invited, some required, all silent. Chloe Ramsey sat in the third row, hands folded tightly in her lap, nervous but present. That mattered. An independent investigator named Elaine Porter, a former federal civil rights attorney in her 60s, silver-haired, entirely out of patience for corporate fog, opened her folder. The review found no evidence of an equipment change, no legitimate operational conflict, and no safety-related reason for the removal of Mr. Marsh from his confirmed first-class seat. The seat was manually released from a terminal operated by Patricia Doyle. The reassignment was then defended by senior flight attendant Craig Sullivan, who failed to verify the record and characterized Mr. Marsh as refusing cooperation. She turned a page. Witness statements also confirm Mr. Marsh received materially different treatment in the Sterling Lounge prior to boarding, with no recorded service contact from lounge attendant Deborah Hayes during a 41-minute period, despite repeated service to nearby passengers. She closed the folder. Our conclusion is clear. Mr. Marsh was subjected to discriminatory treatment based on race and perceived belonging. This was not an isolated misunderstanding. It was enabled by a culture that allowed employees to confuse authority with judgment and customer service with social sorting. Even the reporters in the back row stopped typing for a breath at that last phrase. Gerald Ashworth leaned toward his microphone, and this time nothing about his voice was rehearsed. "Mr. Marsh, on behalf of Continental Crest, I accept the finding in full. We failed you. We failed the passengers who trusted us. We failed employees who may have wanted to speak up, but didn't believe the company would protect them if they did. That changes now." He slid a document forward. Effective today, independent review of all involuntary downgrades and cabin conflicts. Any employee may pause an escalation and request supervisory review without retaliation. Passenger dignity training tied to every promotion and pay review. Quarterly public data. We will not hide behind averages. We will measure what happens to people. Walter Kessler spoke next, his voice catching once and not once apologizing for it. "I spent my career moving aircraft. I thought speed was the measure of competence." Yesterday taught me that speed without dignity is just harm, delivered efficiently. Elijah spoke last, quiet enough that the room leaned toward him to hear it. I didn't want an airline to stop. I wanted a gate agent to check a record. I wanted a flight attendant to ask a question before making an assumption. I wanted a lounge attendant to treat a customer like a person before deciding he didn't belong. He paused. That's how small this could have been. That's how most injustice begins. Small enough for people to excuse. Small enough for witnesses to call it awkward. Small enough for a company to file it under customer experience and move on. But when small disrespect repeats for years, across counters and cabins and hotel lobbies and boardrooms, it stops being small to the person carrying it. He looked toward the rows of employees. Power didn't make me worthy of respect. I was worthy before anyone knew my name. That is the lesson this company has to learn. Not how to identify important people, but how to treat people before you know whether they're important. After the hearing, Chloe Ramsey found him near a window in the hallway. "I've been asked to serve on the Employee Reporting Committee," she said. I accepted. "Good, I'm scared. Courage usually means you are." She smiled, small and unashamed, and this time her eyes didn't look like shame. They looked like release. 6 months later, Elijah Marsh flew Continental Crest again, Denver to Heathrow, the same route, a different season. He did not book anonymously this time. At the gate, a new supervisor named Renata Okoye greeted him by name, pulled up his confirmed seat without being asked twice, and said simply, "Welcome back, Mr. Marsh. 2A is ready for you. No performance in it, just competence, finally doing its job." In the lounge beforehand, an older black man in a flat cap had stopped him near the window, his wife's hand in his. "I saw what happened to you 6 months ago," the man said. "My grandson called me from college, said, 'Grandpa, did you see that man make them say it out loud?' I've waited a long time to hear somebody say it out loud." Elijah took the offered hand. It was warm, thin, steady. "I hope the next part is kinder," the man said. "So do I," Elijah answered. He still carries his father's briefcase, scuffed at the corners, plain in rooms built for wealth. He still hears his mother's voice some mornings, the way you hear a song you didn't know you'd memorized. Don't let them make you small. He didn't. And somewhere in a training module now required for every Continental Crest employee who works a counter or a cabin, there is a single sentence that Elaine Porter insisted, stay in, word for word. Dignity is not a courtesy upgrade. It is the price of doing business with human beings. If this story stayed with you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognized someone in it, maybe even yourself, that recognition is worth sitting with for a minute before you scroll away. Think about the last time you were the one who noticed something wrong and said nothing. And the last time you were the one who said something small and it mattered more than you expected. If you know someone who needs to hear that they are not invisible, this is the story to send them. And if you've ever stood in that room, at either end of it, say so in the comments. I read everyone.